Welcome to Frequency. I'm Jenny Field.
And I'm Chuck Ghost. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. What matters this week, Jenny? We're going to be talking about how Home Depot is sharing the exact same RTO plan in back-to-back years. Chief communication officers are now making up to $1 million a year and $5 million budgets, yet a third of them still have not figured out their AI comm strategy. In addition to AI investment in 3 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, only 10% of employees can actually use these tools effectively, while half think they're proficient when they're actually not. Meanwhile, 34% of employees are actively job hunting, and only 1 in 4 feel appreciated at work. But in between episodes, Jenny, you and I have this epic long WhatsApp chat thread going on where this can never go public for the things that we're sharing back and forth on there. What are some things on your mind this week?
So I always enjoy our WhatsApps. And the thing that we've talked about a little bit this week is the Super Bowl. So you are a big NFL fan. I'm a household with an NFL fan. So we always watch the Super Bowl here, which is about 11:30 at night. So it starts for us and it finishes around 3:30 in the morning. But we were chatting a little bit about the halftime show and the disappointing Patriots. But importantly, any thoughts on the halftime show? I know it's been a big topic of conversation, certainly your side of the pond. So what did you think of Bad Bunny?
Well, let me give a slight correction earlier on. I appreciate the NFL, but I am a Cincinnati Bengals fan. So when it's not the Bengals in the Super Bowl, which is unfortunately quite often, I really don't care. I have no rooting interest in the game whatsoever. I don't know that anybody who's not a Patriots fan really wanted the Patriots to win anyway. There's just a lot of bad blood there with other football fans. But the Bad Bunny show was remarkable. It was amazing. It just this intense and odd misplaced focus on the language aspect of it, and even some of the misinformation early on, or I should say misunderstanding, when people are like, I can't believe they're not even having an American do it. And I'm like, wait, like people had to learn that Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican residents are U.S. citizens. Like just all this, it didn't matter what he did. Some people just made up their mind that they didn't like it. That's fine. I guess that's a choice you make. But truly going in, like it was such a remarkable show, and to now learn after the fact all the little subtle placements of things that were not political. These weren't secret political messages. These were celebrating this Puerto Rican heritage that exists all across the U.S. So I thought it was remarkable.
Yeah, I loved it. And a bit like you, I loved reading things afterwards. Like for anyone that didn't watch it, it was, I think you said to me on WhatsApp, it was like watching a music video live. Like it was just exceptional. But there's one bit where he grabs a drink from a lady at a bar and it's just a nice moment. And then you realize she actually runs like a really iconic bar in Puerto Rico, and I just thought that was just really lovely. My favorite bit was that the trees that were used were people. I didn't realize that until afterwards, that these people were walking onto the pitch dressed as trees. But it was just such a genius way of getting the trees onto the pitch. Like, how efficient. I just thought it was excellent. Really, really good.
Yeah,
Loved it.
I learned a little more about that too, because you talk about the creativity and executing on that the NFL has restrictions on how much equipment can come on and off the field in an amount of time. And so that was this very creative solution. And I learned that there were some pretty unique restrictions of who could be grass and who couldn't. And you had to be like under, I want to say it was 6 feet or 6'1" or something like that. So I would have failed right away.
You would not be able to do that now. You'd have been a tree.
And you had to have marching band experience so that you knew how to like find your mark and move around a field. And I was like, man, they found people to do that. What a cool experience for those people to now have this story of them being grass in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Did you see the guy who tracked it on Strava? And then his picture is like just his face in the grass as well. Yes. I just thought it was great. So that's been our main topic, I think, this week, in amongst all of the articles that we share back and forth to decide what we're going to talk about. So you're kicking us off with Home Depot.
Absolutely. So Home Depot just announced that corporate employees need to return to office 5 days a week starting April 6th. Which would be unremarkable corporate news, except for one small detail. They already announced this back in January of 2025. Same company, same mandate, just a different month. This isn't a communication problem. It's purely a compliance problem. When you have to tell people something twice, it's not because they didn't hear you the first time. Stanford's Nick Bloom has data showing 17% of companies are already on their third return to office policy, not counting repeats, which is simply not iterating. That's pure failure. For IC and HR teams, this raises an uncomfortable question. How many times can you announce the same policy before you admit the policy itself is the problem? Home Depot paired their second announcement with 800 layoffs, mostly in tech roles. The message lands differently when it comes with a side of job cuts, though. Employees aren't stupid. They can see when RTO is change management and when it's workforce reduction by another name. Jenni, here's what I'm stuck on. Is repeating the announcement admitting the first one failed, or is it doubling down on a bad bet? Because I can't figure out how internal comms teams are supposed to message this internally without looking completely ineffective.
So I remember when you sent this to me and I replied and went, have they just repeated the same thing? And you were like, yes. There's lots of questions here, aren't there, about doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome is the definition of insanity, I think. And what I think is the issue here is that it's a credibility issue for me. I think the leadership aren't being followed, they aren't being believed, and people are just not doing it. What's interesting, I think, from an internal comms and culture perspective, is there were clearly, whilst they have done job cuts announced with this one, there were clearly no consequences for 12 months of people not doing it. And I feel like the story is missing. Like, we've talked about RTO a lot. Like, why do you want them to come back? What is it you're really trying to achieve? Why is it so important? And if you tried last year and it didn't work, then what was the impact on the organization as a result of that you're now trying to fix? I think we're just missing that link back and that link to everything. But I also think when we're doing things that change cultures and behaviors, which this stuff is, we don't take the time to really engage and speak to all of the different management layers in the organization. So for me, this isn't necessarily a top leadership position. For me, this is an engagement of leaders throughout the organization. And I wonder what the process has been to discuss, engage, and go through that process with everybody. The final point I'll make is that what I think this signals is that this change of starting to cement ways of working post-pandemic, 5 years on, takes time. Like, you can't just communicate it once and things change. There is a time element around change, which is around 1 to 2 years based on research that I saw a few years ago. And I don't think leaders are thinking about things in that time frame. So actually, if you think it's going to take us 2 years to actually get the culture where we want it to be and get people working in the way we want them to because of whatever reason, people aren't giving themselves that time. And I think this also reinforces this instant need that we seem to have to do things when actually that's just not how human beings work.
Yeah, I talked to a Home Depot employee after I saw this, not at like my local Home Depot, like a corporate employee. And they said employees called their bluff. Like, they're not, there's no teeth to this. We see what they want. We can deliver what they want without having this strict mandate or this strict policy. And I don't think these layoffs are like a punishment for not following it. It just shows this ineffective leadership of, we really mean it this time. Like, we really mean it. And the employees are like, yeah, we know how to do our jobs. Yeah. Like, we will come in when it's right to come in. It's the right time to do it. We don't need to be in here 5 days a week. And so the fact that this has now come out again, I think it just shows how ineffective the leadership was the first time, that now they're doing it again the second time, which I don't know that any sort of effectiveness has increased over that time. If employees were like, yeah, we're going to keep doing our job the way we know the best way to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a bigger issue around like accountability and stuff like that anyway. But you mentioned a statistic in your sort of summary from Stanford's Nick Bloom saying that 17% of companies are already on their third policy. I really hope that somebody, because I'm not going to do it, has a look at that policy evolution. Like, so if they're now on the third, what's been the difference each time? What are we changing? Is it going from 5 to 3 to 2? Or is it going from months to weeks? John, what's that shift that people are doing? I think that piece of data is really interesting to see how people are adapting and shifting it. Because I'm wondering if it's going that way in terms of we've started strict, we've relaxed it, or we were relaxed and now we're going strict. Like, I'm really interested in that swing.
Next up, from Section, after 3 years and hundreds of millions of dollars in enterprise AI investment, here's what we have to show for it. 90% of the workforce still doesn't know how to use AI effectively. Only 10% scored as AI proficient in Section's latest survey of 5,000 knowledge workers. But half of workers think they are proficient. So the gap between perception and reality, this is the problem. Companies that spent 2025 focused on the basics. Does your team know how to use AI safely? Can they write a decent prompt? Employees know what AI is and can summarize emails, but as AI advances, the bar is rising. In 2026, proficiency means incorporating AI into meaningful value-added work every week, and this just isn't happening. 25% of employees don't know what to use AI for, and 28% don't know how to use it at all. For comms and HR, the parallels to every other change initiative are painful. 71% of companies approve AI use, but 48% haven't deployed an LLM. It's like announcing a hybrid work policy without giving anyone access to the VPN. Even worse, 9% of companies still ban AI completely, though 32% of employees at these companies use it anyway. When 43% of workers at companies with AI bans are still using it, people will find a way. That felt very Jurassic Parkish there. The really uncomfortable finding for IC teams, manager support for AI dropped 11% since May of 2025. Only 7% of individual contributors say their managers expect daily AI use. 29% receive encouragement to use it. You can deploy all the tools you want, but if managers aren't reinforcing the behavior, are you just buying expensive software that people will ignore? This should sound familiar to everyone. Jenni, I'm curious about your thoughts on this shadow use of AI. Are companies this naive?
So I want to come back to the perception and reality bit at the start of this, because I was just having a quick look as you were talking about. It has a name. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a cognitive bias due to a lack of self-awareness and poor metacognition. People cannot accurately assess their own incompetence. And I did write about this in my book about credible leadership, but I think this is exactly what this is. You've got this real disconnect in terms of belief and reality, and I think that is across the AI industry as a whole, which I'm not going to get into today. But I think we do have this real belief about the fact it's going to be utterly life-changing, and then there's a reality that I think maybe isn't quite there. I think the bit that's interesting about this is this manager support that's dropping. And I think that's interesting for AI teams in terms of that shadow use of our AI and all of those things. Is why is it dropping? Is it dropping because people haven't got the time, or they don't want people to know? Like, what's going on? Or is it just that the hype is just coming down? And there is a little bit of a link back to our Super Bowl story, which I was reading. I think I sent you the link on Instagram to some insights around the number of ads that were about AI at the Super Bowl, and the link to trust in AI and all sorts of stuff in there. So I suppose there's a question back for you is, do you think it's all linked to the people starting to trust it less now?
I think what I would say seeing and personally experiencing is there's a gap that's accelerating. This gap is getting wider between what a lot of these AI-driven companies believe is possible versus what the actual user understands. And when you've got, let's say, about 1 out of 10 companies banning it completely, I can't believe they're that naive to think their employees aren't still using it. So then why are you banning it? So there's still employees that are using it, and these are just the 32% who admit they are using it. There's some that I guarantee you lied when they answered that because they didn't want to get busted somehow. So there's this gap that's happening, and this is something I've experienced. I shared this with you. I broke Claude yesterday. Like I was...
And hang on. I like how you say you shared this with me. You were sending me screenshots of rage messages yesterday. It wasn't like, oh, by the way, I've broken Claude. It was like...
Yes. that I end up on this side of Instagram and TikTok where people are talking about Claude Code and Claude Cowork and, oh my gosh, you've got to be using this. You've got to be using it. I spend hours trying to figure out how to use it. And I would consider myself a pretty eager learner, relatively tech savvy. And I was struggling for something that other people were saying, oh my gosh, this is the future. Everybody's got to be doing it. And I get there's a learning curve. I have some patience when it comes to this. I think there's some people that are like, I don't even have an interest in this. So this is where this gap is starting to happen between where people who just want to do their job and do the work. And yes, if AI can make it more efficient, great, but not, I've got to go learn this other thing and expose myself to frustration that is part of it. That's where this gap is happening. I'm not even getting into this Claude bot thing that is happening where people are buying Mac Minis and setting up these things on their side of their desk, and they're building companies. And I get that is all happening, but this gap is widening.
And I think the gap is widening to that point because I don't think people can see the benefit of the time invested to do that. Like you said, you're an eager learner. You're always playing with stuff and learning and figuring stuff out. You've got way more patience than I have for any of that. And I think that's part of the problem. Unless you can see, this is going to help me, and there's no friction in being able to get to that reward and that benefit, people aren't going to spend, not the majority of people, I don't think, are going to spend the time, to your point. I think if the reward was clearer, like if you spend time and learn how to do this is what will be the benefit. That's like any sales technique. Then people would be more engaged and interested in doing it. Whereas I think all people are doing at the moment is putting pictures of themselves in and asking it to create a caricature of itself, which I did, which was awful.
Which I have not seen yet. I would like to see that. I guess in my mind, I went to, like, if we compare AI usage to cooking, there are scratch cooks. There are people that you can kind of throw some ingredients at them and they can kind of figure something out and make it. Then there's these crazy high-end 5-star chefs, whatever they are. There's people like myself, which I can follow a recipe, but if you just put the ingredients in front of me, I am not going to figure out what I need to do, what temperature, what needs to mix with what. I think people need recipes. I think they need, oh, you want to get from here to here? Do these 10 steps. Yeah. Oh, okay. The more you do that, the more you can start inventing your own recipes. I think that's the mindset I'm trying to bring to it.
I feel like you've just created an idea for an AI recipe book now.
There probably should. Well, I think that's where these, like, whatever they're called, skills or gems or whatever these things that are built inside of some of these platforms, I think that's what some of those are. But you have to find them. And if it's not something you're thinking of or looking for, it's like, I need a HelloFresh version of AI where it's sending me the ingredients, sending me the instructions. Here, go make this meal. That's what I need from an AI platform.
Love it.
Next, we have chief communication officers are having their moment. Median compensation hit $900,000 to $1 million in 2025, with nearly half earning 7 figures and some clearing $2 million a year. More than half now sit on executive committees, with a 17% increase in direct CEO reporting lines since 2023. Budgets are also increasing. 54% of CCOs now command more than $5 million size budgets. By every metric that matters to the C-suite, communications has arrived. But here's a bit of the uncomfortable part from this research. These newly elevated, highly compensated strategic leaders are just as lost on AI as everyone else. See last article. 1/3 of CCOs surveyed haven't defined their approach to AI-driven communications. AI use is widespread. 96% report using it, but mostly for basic stuff, things like content creation, media monitoring, and internal communications. The depth isn't matching the adoption rate. For comms professionals, this should sting a little bit. Internal communications acumen was the second most desired trait when CCOs hire, trailing only media relations skills. Yet when asked what their teams focus on, internal comms still plays second fiddles to corp comms, media relations, and crisis management. This Korn Ferry report includes a quote that's either inspiring or damning, depending on your mood. Quote, internal audiences are the most important audiences because, quote, the inside voices are also the outside voices. Leadership finally gets that employees are the story, and they're paying CCOs record salaries to manage that reality. Jenni, going back to this quote around internal audiences and the most important audiences, while simultaneously spending most of their budget on external comms, how long are we supposed to pretend that this gap doesn't exist?
So I feel like this report just articulates what people have probably thought for a long time, but action hasn't followed. So internal audiences are the most important audiences. It reminds me of a phrase that Rachel Miller uses a lot about what goes on the inside shows up on the outside. So it's that same ethos, really. And I think that's been talked about for a long time. I know I first heard that phrase at a conference, going back about 15 years ago. And I think leaders believe that. If we think about the things we've talked about over the last year, we've talked about leaders showing that employee engagement is the top of their list from the Institute of Leadership report. We've talked about the fact that the organizational success, that culture, is really important to drive the growth people want, but they're not doing the work to actually make that a reality. And as you were reading this out about the AI piece as well, I was thinking, why is it so important that chief communications officers have an AI plan? Why is it not as important for finance or HR? Why is it just the CCOs that need to get this right? But it's because in the same paragraph, you're saying that organizations are really using AI for some of that basic stuff of content creation and things like that. So if there's no strategy from comms around how to use AI internally, it's going to get very messy and very chaotic very quickly. For me, this doesn't feel particularly new. I think the salaries are staggering, but I'm not seeing the leadership come along with that price, because that gap should be closing. If we've said that actually in 2025, this is what's going on, that gap should be closing if there is now somebody sitting on the executive committee. Otherwise, it really slams everyone's view that you have to have a seat at the table in order to have any influence. Well, this would prove that you actually don't, and that's nonsense.
Yeah, I see it as this, put your money where your mouth is. If you believe these internal audiences are so critical, then where's the budget to do it? And to your point, I think this just confirms some of that stress and frustration that we've heard from the industry around that, yeah, everybody says it's important, but you're not funding it. You're not putting resources behind it. I think the other interesting data point was they're saying now more than half sit on executive committees. I would have assumed all CCOs would have been on the executive committees. So that's even signaling me there's now a tier at some companies of the exec level, that C-suite is not just one level. There are levels within that C-suite. That was news to me. To your point, the salaries, while staggering, I don't know, perhaps might be encouraging to some people that are driven by that. So if you know that, so long, it seemed like the CCO path was you had to come from marketing or PR to get there. So if internal audiences are this critical, maybe that is the path for people that are in internal comms to get to that role, knowing you probably need some other exposure as well. So yeah, nothing earth-shattering here other than probably the dollar figures. And even I don't want to indict them on using AI for the basic stuff, because that goes back to my earlier point on our previous story, which is that's how you have to get started.
Yeah.
You have to get using it in ways that make sense to you so that you can explore ways that might make sense for the business. So I think they kind of viewed it as like basic as like a negative, where I see that as like, sometimes that's foundational things for people to start experimenting and playing. Finally, we've got the Achievers Workforce Institute surveyed 4,000 employees and HR professionals across 8 countries, and the picture is bleak. Only 1 in 4 employees feel appreciated. If 34% of the U.S. full-time workforce switches jobs in the year, the cost of the turnover could hit $1.3 to $5.1 trillion. This range doesn't even include part-time workers or the additional 22% who are quote-unquote considering a change. The talent retention crisis everyone predicted after the pandemic, it's here, and it's worse than the forecasts. The gap between what employees want and what they're getting is almost comically simple. Employees who feel fairly compensated are 2.5 times more likely to be engaged, but only 17% feel fairly paid. Employees who receive recognition weekly are 12x more likely to find work meaningful and 56 times more likely to feel connected to company values. Yet only 19% say they're recognized weekly. The fixes aren't complicated or expensive. Recognition, appreciation, connection, these cost almost nothing, and companies simply just aren't doing them. For internal comms and HR teams, here's the part that should bother you. While your leadership is focused on RTO mandates, AI deployments, and office space strategies, many things we talk about on this podcast, your employees have already checked out. They're not debating whether to come back to the office. They're debating whether to come back at all. The Achievers data shows that 75% of employees say removing rewards, simple things like gift cards, or even recognition points would influence their decision to leave. We're penny pinching on the things that matter while CEOs collect seven-figure comp packages to mandate policies nobody wants. The research points to three cultural pillars that actually work: managerial recognition, connection, and rewards. None of these require big real estate decisions or enterprise software deployments. They require leaders to pay attention to the people doing the work, which, according to this report, is the one thing we're consistently failing to do. Jenni, the solutions here are truly insultingly simple, or should be, to companies. Recognition, appreciation, connection. None of that costs real money. Why aren't companies doing it, and what's getting in the way?
So it is insultingly simple. And I think you and I have both talked about this for a long time, about all the things that you need to fix your organization, to make it less chaotic, to build credible leadership, to create an experience that people enjoy. None of that costs money. It's just time. And I think that this is the root cause of the issue, is leaders don't want to give it the time. And I think that comes from the fact that they don't really know what that time needs to look like. So if I think about the work I do with leadership teams and directors and groups, and looking at how we can, build credible teams and shift that, they are making the time to come to workshops, with me, to have conversations with me about their leadership style. That's not going to fix it, right? There needs to be ongoing stuff that needs to happen, but they've identified this as a priority and they've made the time to do that. Now, not everybody is doing it. And if they're not doing it, it's because they're very good at saying all the right things, but not doing all the right things. And that is uncomfortable, but we are all good at that, right? I'm really good at saying I'm going to go to the gym every day next week and not doing it, right? I took my gym stuff away with me with a work thing this week. I didn't use it at all. So sometimes things don't happen, right? But we have to check in on our values, what we're trying to achieve, what's the outcome we're looking for, and then do the work. I genuinely believe that part of this problem is people think the solutions are too big. They don't want to give it the time because they don't really know what that time needs to look like. And they don't want to show a vulnerability in that they don't know that. And I think that's where it comes from. And it takes a lot. And I know it takes a lot for leaders and teams to pick up the phone, certainly to me, and say, we've got a credibility issue here and we need to talk about it. That takes a lot to recognize that. But find a trusted person, find someone to help you, find someone to make your organization great, and then absolutely smash it. Don't just bury your head in the sand and go, oh yeah, no, we just haven't got time, because you're just prioritizing other things. And I don't know how you're still thinking that is the right thing to not prioritize. I just can't fathom it.
I think the part that really surprised me was that, I shouldn't say surprised, maybe how big of an issue this was.
Okay.
That the basic level of that employer-employee relationship is very transactional. Of how many people just want to be paid fairly. Mm. They're not they're all these other things that drive, like that was the driver. That, and even down to where I've even at times probably trivialized recognition programs that included things like gift cards and points. And I'm like, that kind of stuff shouldn't matter. Well, it's not for me to decide. This data shows those things do matter. Mm. And those are very simple things to do. Paying people fairly is a simple thing to do. Having basic recognition programs that are one-way, two-way, omnidirectional, whatever, that's a very simple thing to do. And if just by doing those things, paying people fairly and recognizing them, what does that unlock for the business? So why is that being ignored? And I even read today that when I said that some of these CEOs are like seven-figure compensation package, for some it's 8. Like I just saw Morgan Stanley's CEO has a new compensation package that's like somewhere in the $40+ million a year. That is just it's hard to get your head around. And I'm not saying he deserves it, doesn't deserve it. That's not for me to decide. That's a lot of money being thrown around. So apparently things are quite good at Morgan Stanley. But again, do people feel like they're being paid fairly? Is there simple recognition? Like, are those things happening? They're just not.
No. And when you talk about being paid fairly, I always think this is a really hard, that's a really hard thing to answer, because what you think is fair and what I think is fair is very subjective. And I think that is a hard conversation. So, and also, if you're comparing it to someone who's got a salary of 40 million, then you could argue that anything less than 20 million is not fair. Do you see what I mean? Like, I think fair as a word is really loaded, and I think we have to be a bit mindful of that. I also think it comes back to feeling valued. I think that's ultimately what people want. You know, there is an element of being fairly paid because that links to your value. But I think, you know, fairness is tricky when you've got such wild salaries like that. I mean, to your point, who knows if you know, that's the going rate. But, you know, I just think there are so much basics. And we talked about this the other week about the Ross Edgley, who was swimming around the UK and he just wanted bread. Like, you don't need to skywrite. They just want bread. Like, it doesn't need to be big fanfare stuff. And I would hope that any leaders or HR teams listening to this are really pushing for that value to be shown in the way that is appropriate for the culture, but that it's on that list and it is a priority.
That's what we had up for this week, Jenny. Let's get into our freakouts. What is your freakout this week?
So my freak out this week is linked to being away with my entrepreneur group, who are a fabulous bunch of other business owners, and we get together a few times a year. And I learnt a new phrase while we were together. So we spend time talking about our businesses and it's like any challenges we've got, and we help each other solve them. But we talked about the word parasocial, which became the word of the conversation, which when I look it up as a dictionary, it says denoting a relationship characterised by a one-sided, unreciprocated sense of intimacy felt by a fan or follower for a well-known or prominent figure, in which the fan or follower comes to feel that they know the celebrity as a friend. And we were talking about it because we were talking about podcasting and the parasocial relationship that happens when people listen to podcasts. And I liked it as a phrase, and I thought it was worth sharing.
Well, this goes back to, probably 2016, 2017, when I was doing the Ecology podcast, when that was the thing.
Yes.
And I was at an event and I was on the phone call and somebody walked by and they waited me to get the phone and they're like, I know you. I've heard your voice. And it was like, they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's from the podcast. Like this weird relationship that we form with different aspects of individuals, whether it be their face, their voice, whatever it is. It is interesting.
Yeah. I really, as a phrase, it just became something to be very mindful of. And I know that doing this podcast, which I love doing, is we're kind of in your ears while you're listening to us. And that's going straight into your brain. So it's such an intimate place to be inside somebody's ears and creating parasocial relationships. So yeah, that was my freak out this week, being in people's ears.
My freak out was going to be, you sent me on Instagram, like these old words that need to come back. And one of the words in there was this, which I had not heard before, surprisingly enough, was chuckaboo. Which is apparently a phrase to mean like very dear friend or bestie type thing. I'm like, how do we bring back chuckaboo? So but that's actually not my freak out. That's more mindset. My freak out this week is a bit of a reminder for everyone that we know this, but that the internet lives forever. And surfaced to me in the last week was an interview that took place 2 years ago. Listening to the interview, it was not clear that it was 2 years ago. It was with Substack CEO Chris Best. He was being interviewed by Nilay Patel, who I think this might have been on the Decoder podcast or some sort of interview series like that. Anybody can go find this. And this is when Substack was launching a new feature. And Nilay Patel, who is of Indian descent, asked about some of their moderation guidelines and basically says, hey, if somebody goes on there and says, hey, all the brown people should have to leave the United States, he's like, you would censor that. You would take that out. And to see the CEO start backpedaling and relying on things like, well, our terms of service say this, and well, we believe in free speech and blah, 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 blah. And what I appreciated about this interviewer was basically, I'm summing this up. He's like, you could have just said no.
Yeah.
Like, do you realize how bad you look on this interview? He says this on the interview. You realize how bad this makes you look by simply saying like, no, of course we would not. So when I didn't realize this was 2 years old, because this felt very much like now.
Yeah.
Like I was almost like Nilay Patel, like was seeing this happening before the rest of us. And they have updated their content guidelines, but they still do not ban content. They center around things like Nazi words and all this other kind of stuff. But in theory, on Substack, someone could still go on there and say, I think all the brown people should have to leave the United States, and Substack would allow it. And
Wow.
to see the CEO cower and backpedal and start looking around like he's looking for help from somewhere, and there's no help on that. It was crystal clear where he stood. It's kind of a little bit both enjoyable and painful to watch, but it was more freaking out around the lack of humanity from some of these CEOs, where they don't want to deny anyone, so they allow everyone. And the fact is, he was saying like, he could have said, of course we wouldn't allow that. Done. Over. Yeah. But no, he wouldn't. And also the fact that people just still to this day do not understand free speech. Yeah. Like, it just means, well, it used to mean you weren't going to jail. That doesn't mean that now. But you don't get to say whatever you want and there be no consequences. Like, there's always consequences to things. Yeah. So that was my freak out. Was seeing this interview, I thought was real, or I thought was present, like now, was actually from 2 years ago. Yeah. But it still feels like it's
so relevant. And I think there's, just to pick up that point, I think there's something so dangerous about some of the content and the way the content is surfaced now, that you don't really see a date, or you don't know. Like, my Instagram feed is full of stuff from like November. And I'm like, why are you showing me this now? Like, there's so much more stuff that's going on, but it's like it's reinforcing the irritation or the anger at things that happen then, even now. And I just think and some things it's harder to see. It's really hard to see when things were done. So it's just a risk, I think, in terms of that data. So always. But
I'll put a link to that interview in the show notes for anyone to watch it, and just hope that your CEO never answers a question or an interview.
Learn
in that
from
same
this.
style. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us this week. All the articles that have inspired the conversation will be in the show notes. And don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone you think would enjoy listening or watching, because you can also find Frequency on YouTube. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show. We're back every Monday with more news, insights, and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.